Hi everyone, my name is Jessica here and I'm a grad student over at the Mari Pando Center, and I'm here to introduce Tim. Tim Slessor was born in England to a fifth-generation Australian mother and a British father. During World War II, Tim moved with his mother to Australia. Tim later served as a lieutenant in the 40th Commando, the British Green Beret. Following his military service, Tim attended Cambridge University. After graduation, Tim and 5 friends set out in 2 works-provided Land Rovers to try to drive overland from the English Channel to Singapore. Tim will be speaking more about this during his presentation on November 13th. Tim joined the BBC in 1957 as a trainee. In 1963, Tim directed and presented a 5-part series about the West, from the Kansas wheat fields to the Pine Ridge Reservation. It was during this assignment that Tim says that he became totally beguiled with the West, by its geography and its people. Indeed, so deep was the fascination that a little while later he quit the BBC to come and teach for a year at Chadron State College. With his wife and 2 very small children, it was, he said, one of the happiest years of my life. For more than 60 years, Tim worked with the BBC, making documentaries all over the world. Tim received a Peabody Award for 2 programs he directed for Alistair Cook in his America series. In 1990, he turned to freelance work, writing for various magazines and directing and producing for the BBC and the National Geographic. Now retired, Tim has journeyed beyond wide Missouri 7 times. Some of these travels, much mixed with history, have resulted in his book, More Than Cowboys, which will be available for purchase after this presentation on the back table. Tim is hosted by the Mari Pando's High Plains Heritage Center at Chadron State College through a private donation to the Chadron State Foundation. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Tim Slessor.
Well, thank you very much. I wasn't expecting anything like this full house, because I gather it's the first night of the World Series and there's some music and all kinds of competition, so I'm very flattered that so many people should have come. If you can't hear me at the back, please wave a hand or shout or do something. I have got a bit of a frog in my throat. Now, it's fairly obvious already, even if Jessica hadn't told you, that I'm a Brit. I'm reminded of this by an 8-year-old daughter of some friends I was staying with in Colorado a while back. She didn't say anything for the first 2 days, and then she looked at me with one of the sort of steady gaze that an 8-year-old sometimes has, and said, "Uncle Tim, why do you talk funny?" And the only answer to that is, well, I can't help it. There's no point. I object to Brits who sometimes say, well, it isn't me, it's you. No, that's a load of rubbish. We talk different. I also, when I'm back in my place, my country, I drive different too. And our light switches are different. They're down for up, down for on, and up for off. And what else? Hold my knife and fork, or use my knife and fork a bit differently. You cut it up and then you park your knife and use your fork. Very sensible, but different. Okay. To some extent, Jessica has explained sort of who I am, and I'm glad that she mentioned that I was here. It took a year time out in 1965, 66, and my boss was Dorset Graves. So there's a sort of I don't quite know how to put it, but I feel, Dorset, thank you. Back for them and for now. And Meredith, his wife. Now, why am I here? Because this is about my 21st, I've lost count, 21st, 22nd trip across the Atlantic. I think Jessica said I've been 7 times west of the Missouri. No, it would be more accurately at least 17 times. And my passion is the high plains. Southeast Montana, Wyoming, the western half of, well, I have nothing against the eastern half of Nebraska, but I prefer the western half. South Dakota, Colorado, and into Kansas. So, you know, why am I fascinated? You don't need me to tell you, but I'll tell you all the same. You live in a fascinating corner of, yes, a marvelous country. But why am I fascinated? Okay, so basically I think it's a bit difficult to tease out, you know, in sort of really logical terms. But I can see sort of 3 headings coming at me. The first one is a rather mundane heading, the geography. But by geography, I mean the vastness. It's brought home to me almost every time I get in the car and drive any place. But it was brought home to me the other day, coming up from Alliance. You come up on a bit of a crest, the first sort of real pines, right? And on the right, I don't mention it because it's significant, but simply to identify the place next time you go there. There's what appears to be a green concrete water tank or something, and it has something about the fur trade, what have you. And you come, you can see 80, 90 miles, well, you can see that a long way. You can see, I'm sure, the Black Hills. And if the light is right, it's fantastic. It's the nearest thing, I think, to a view of Earth, unless you were privileged enough to go into space. It bowls me over every time. And there are so many places like that, with the scenery just, you see, because Nebraska is about the same size as Great Britain, slightly smaller, that is fractionally small. You have a population of 2 million. God damn it. We have a population of 64 million. Now, you know, so our perceptions, I've been coming over long enough and often enough that my perceptions have got used to it, but well, not entirely used to it, because I still get this feeling, marvelous feeling, when I see this fabulous view. But, you know, 64 million. See, 150 miles, say, drive to you folks. I'm not saying you'd necessarily do it before breakfast, but if you had to, you would go see the girlfriend, the boyfriend, mother, father, whoever. 150 miles to me, back where I come from, I mean, you've got to think about that, because there's a lot of traffic. When friends from Nebraska, all these parts, come and to London, and we go off in my car down to I don't know, Stonehenge or up to Cambridge or someplace. So many of them, not all of them, but so many of them say, and I take them sort of rather attractive ways to little pubs and things, not perhaps on the main roads. And they all say, it's so green. Is it always green? I mean, this is like in July or August, you know, toward the end of summer. So green, and the trees, well, so many trees. You know, to which I'm polite, but to me that's where it is. And it's this contrast. But by contrast, 150 years to you, I'm taking the liberty of sort of looking at your reactions, but 150 years to you, something happened 150 years ago. I don't say it happened sort of just before yesterday, but it's way back. It's just this side, I say in my book, of just this side of Magna Carta. Yes, I exaggerate, but only to make the point. Whereas 150 years to me is it's not the day before yesterday, but it's the day before yesterday. I have met and interviewed for the BBC. I can think of 3 particular people. One was he must have been well into his 80s, on Pine Ridge, a Sioux, who told me that as a young lad of 13, 14, he was a little uncertain of the exact age, he had watched the 7th Cavalry, the same 7th that had been chopped up 14 years before at Bighorn, ride out to Wounded Knee. You know, I felt sort of privileged to have talked to him. I interviewed a man called Bert Charter, who was the son of Butch Cassidy's horseholder, Butch Cassidy's getaway man. And Bert told me, I remember the phrasing quite well, he said, well, Butch wouldn't have been such a damn fool down the bank to make some cash withdrawals, and I like that term, without a good getaway man. And oldest of all, near Greeley, Colorado, Mr. Roberts, he was 101. Now that was, I talked to him in 1963, so he was born, you know, coincident with the Civil, well, he was, what, 3 or 4 years old when Lincoln was assassinated. And, you know, to coin a cliche, I feel I've sort of touched the face of history in a very real way. So that's another part of my fascination, and that's why I sort of, hell's bells, I better write a book and sort of try to draw these things together. Now, there's nothing very original in my book, but there's sort of a certain amount of personal reflections. So the geography, the history, and lastly, you, the people. Sound terribly patronizing, but you'll forgive me. I've never met a Westerner that I didn't like. And I can think of all kinds of sort of incidents. A year or two ago, I was pulled over for speeding by Highway Patrol, and he came up to the window, and he said, as far as I remember, the conversation went, well, you know why I've stopped you? And I said, well, yes, I do. And he said, you in a hurry? And I thought very quickly, and I thought, I'm going to be cheeky here, what the hell? And I said, well, yeah, no, I'm not in a hurry, but this is such a magnificent road. I feel that we ought to be, giving it its due, its rightful due. But bless his socks, I thought he was going to be a bit cross, but no, he sort of smiled. And then he said, well, what, Mr. Timothy, because he's looking at my license, which is a British license. I said, well, what would they say to you in your country? And I said, well, lying through my teeth, I said, they'd probably give me a good talking to and tell me not to do it again, send me on my way. And he said, well, consider yourself talked to. Don't do it again. Have a great day. That sort of thing happens so often. The other night, last night, I thought, okay, I'll go down to the bean, and there was a lady coming out as I went in, and I thought she was sort of on, I don't know whether she's here now, she may well be, because she said she's coming. I thought she was part of staff, and I said, can I get a decent steak in there? And she said, well, you're better off, blah, blah, blah. And we got talking, and then it turned out she was on the pavement waiting for her husband to come in and pick up. And her husband came in to pick up, and she introduced me to him. And within 10 minutes, we're in having a steak, the three of us. It's that sort of, I don't say it's unique, but I've been, many countries, a lot of places I haven't been, but many places I have been. And I have to tell you, you're among the most friendly, warm and outgoing people I know. As I say, I've been around a bit. Now, yes, a thing that, it doesn't sum you up, but it's neat. Over a barber's mirror, this is some years ago, in North Platte, so I'm having my haircut, and it reads, we Nebraskans think so much of our state that if the good Lord should choose it for his second coming, we'd be pleased, but not much surprised. And I think that says to me, a whole bunch of stuff. I like it. Now, we talk about some of the things, if I may, that we share, the Brits and the United States. There are some of the sort of heavier things like respect for law and innocent until proved guilty and due process and the rights and freedoms of the individual. Very, very important. But I'm not really qualified to talk about it. I'm not terribly well qualified to talk about anything I'm talking about tonight. But that probably not. And then you come to democracy. Now we Brits like to think that we sort of in the the spearhead of the development of democracy. No. We are still learning from you folks. Our parliament, about 25 years ago, adopted, I don't know what you call it in the US, the select committee system. We have committees of congressmen who put people through their paces, interview them quite sharply. We've brought that aboard, and we have that. But more important, suffrage, the right to vote, was more widespread and at an earlier time than us. I jump about a bit, but forgive me. Magna Carta seems to me a bit bogus, because really, and it's credited with more than it deserves, because really it was the big boys tackling the biggest boy, i.e. the king. The workers, the serfs, the villeins, the peasants, they weren't involved at all. And it took many hundreds of years before. Now, I have a quote here from an Englishman traveling in the United States in, I think, about the 1870s. And anyway, And he writes, "The moment of re-election in the United States comes round too frequently, and if members of the national or state legislatures fail to conform strictly to the wishes of the electors, they're ousted as a matter of course." He finds this, quite surprising. "This constant turnover mitigates against good government, which to be effective requires experience and judgment built up on many years. The election of governments should not be determined by persons whose knowledge of the world derives from mere labor." Okay? Now, so he's criticizing the U.S. because that's the way it is, and he doesn't think it should be. So the idea that the United Kingdom is sort of has led the world into democracy just doesn't stand up. Yes, you could. The House of Commons could reasonably claim to be, the mother of parliaments, but go back to the time of the Revolution, the American Revolution. The people in the House of Commons, they weren't elected. It was all kinds of rotten, what we call rotten boroughs. Like it was a fiddle. A lot of those people were not in any way democratically elected, and they had axes to grind, and some of the axes were in North America, in the colonies, and they weren't about to, be too acquiescent. I hope there aren't too many historians present, because they'd probably shoot me down on all kinds of things. But above all, I think the thing we share most is something we're using all that I'm using it now, is the language. Yes, there are differences, but they're interesting, but I don't know that they're terribly significant. Probably like everything I'm saying tonight, I hope it's interesting, but it isn't terribly significant. Oscar Wilde is reported, though it's disputed a bit, to have said, you probably know the quotation, that we're two nations separated by the same language. Well, if I can use the term, and I have to be sort of careful sometimes, because I find I'm using mild obscenities, but we're separated by the same. That to me is a smart-ass type of thing. Am I allowed to say that? Do you know the term? What term? Well, I'm saying that the man who said we're two nations separated by the same language, to me, is a smart-ass comment. And I don't know whether that's... Well, it's easily translated, even if you don't... Yeah, all right. Now, I was going to say, English is a world language. No, it's not a world, it is the world language. Spanish is coming up, maybe, but English is way out in front. If someone came down from Mars, and in sign language said, "What do I do? What do I learn?" You'd have to say learn English, because that will get you further than any other language in most countries. I dare say if you landed in the middle of sort of the jungles of Papua New Guinea wouldn't help too much, but most other places you're going to find someone, and in many places you can find a whole bunch of someones who can speak English. For example, when Volkswagen about 5 years ago set up a factory to build Volkswagen in China. So you've got the Chinese and the Germans. What do they talk? English. Because that's the way they... lots of examples. The other day when the new president of India, Mahendra Modi, was sworn in, he was the first president of the United States, of India, sorry. The first president of India not to be sworn in English for about 90 years. All kinds of examples like that. I mean, the Times of India sells 3 times the number of copies of the Times in London, or the Times of London. There's 300 papers, some of them weeklies, many of them weeklies, 300 papers in India which are published in English. You find that all over the world. As I imply, my job took me to many, many countries, and I couldn't learn Swahili or Hindi or whatever it was where I was going, but English would always work. Now, it's very rich. We'll come to why it's rich. Our dictionary is at least twice as thick as anybody else's, which can cause complications. Now, until about 1900, I think it would be fair to say that the generating force and the pushing of the language was basically with Britain, partly, mostly because we were an imperial power, empire and all that kind of stuff. But since about, say, 1900, and I'm being a bit arbitrary, it's become American, and particularly since the Second World War, and particularly even more since the great development of television and movies and all the rest of it. And now you'll find that there are expressions used around the world which are American. I was listening to the radio at home in Britain. Yes, it was a serious program. It was late at night. It was to do with the devolution ambitions of Scotland. But the interviewer asked a member of Parliament a particularly difficult question, and the member of Parliament replied, after having thought, well, I think I'm going to have to plead the fifth on that. Now, we don't have a first, so, but everybody knows what it meant. And there's a whole bunch of those, many of them coming from sport. For example, it's high time. You'll get members of Parliament saying, high time someone stood up to the plate on that. Well, we don't play baseball, but we know what it means. You know, it's high time somebody took responsibility for that. It's a whole new ball game. I mean, that's 100% American. But I had to ask the other day, I know what it means, with hardball. I know, you know, what we're getting at, but I didn't know quite what hardball is. There are so many from the gold rush, which we still use. How will it pan out? And a lot of Brits will say, get it slightly wrong, and say, how will it plan out? But it comes to the same thing. Stake a claim. Strike it rich. And then from the West, well, that was a bit quick on the draw. She's shot from the hip on that one. Now, those are straight, you know, but they're understood. You can go to Melbourne, Australia, Cape Town in South Africa, Birmingham, as they say. They got adenoids in Birmingham. Well, that's another little point which has nothing. I hop about, but you must forgive me. See, Nebraska, same size as Great Britain. If I was to drive the distance from here to Lincoln, I would, put it this way. Among students, I would say, oh, well, he's from Scottsbluff, because of the way he talks, slightly dialect. Oh, she's from Liverpool, and he's a Scot. Oh, he's from Glasgow, unintelligible. We did an interview one time with a publican, you know, in Glasgow, and I said to the producer, but by that time I was a sort of executive producer, I can't understand a word the fellow's saying. So we put subtitles up. We got into terrible trouble with the mayor of Glasgow because you know, why don't you understand me? Yes, jump the gun, isn't it? I think jump the gun comes from the Oklahoma land rush, where you know they fired a gun and some of them jumped the gun. The Sooners, I love it. The Sooners, super. What other ones? Oh yes, three little phrases I adore. Wise up, go figure, get real. I think that, you know, that sort of, there's something about those. They haven't quite got to us yet, but if I have anything to do with it, they will. Yes, now there are differences in spelling, but then spelling in, the first book I ever wrote, The Dedication, reads to all those who've helped me with my spelling, because without that help, the reading of this book would be impossible. So I'm not a speller, but it's one of the things that gives foreigners difficulty when they're learning English. I mean, you take vein, you know, a vein in your arm, V-E-I-N. I have to think because I'm not a very good speller. I'm vain, V-A-I-N. Am I right? Yes. And wind vein, V-A-N-E. Well, that's, you know, that's or two, of course, two. There are quite a lot of those. You Americans, you've cleaned up your spelling. You know, you've taken the U out of honor and labor. But interestingly, in the Declaration of Independence, honor is spelled O-U-R. Webster hadn't sort of happened then. he got round to it later. We still spell, you know, O-U-R. Theatre, of course, you spell as it sounds, T-E-R. We still spell it as the French do, T-R-E. And there are a whole bunch like that. Incidentally, you can always, no, I'll come to that later. That's another point. Sorry, Beth. Czech, you know, we spell C-H-E-Q-U-E. You spell it much more sensibly C-H-E-E-C-K. And usage, there are some interesting differences there. If you were to say to someone in England, and even I have to think when someone says it to me, and goodness knows, I've spent enough time in the US, when we see it 7:15. 7:15. Oh, I see, yes, 6:45. That's not a phrase that we would use. What are some of the other ones? Oh, well, I've lost my place. Not to worry. Pronunciation. I will be told, oh, I like your accent. I do not say, no, it isn't an accent, it's an accent. You know, you serve you serve in the military. No, I served in the military. I mean, small differences, and they don't really matter, but tomato, please. And a depot. And the classic aluminium, aluminium. Either, you say either, don't you? And I say either now too, because I've been too long with you lot. But most of the folks back where I come from would say either. Yes, I was on about usage, and I got a bit confused on my notes. And I was saying 7:15. There are several others. Different than, you'll say, whereas I say different from. When I was writing my book about the West, because it was, you know, people in the West would read it, I told my computer to spell American. That, no problem. But it couldn't get a grip on usage. And so it would come up with a different from rather than different than, and various things like that. And I have to think quite... now, here's a good one. Well, I hope it's a good one. I am walking along... This is American, though without the accent. I'm walking along the sidewalk looking for a store where I want to buy some stuff. And I find the store and I go in on the first floor. And I take an elevator to the second floor and I buy a pair of pants and some suspenders and a vest. Okay, the English. I'm walking along the pavement looking for a shop. I go in the shop on the ground floor and I take a lift to the first or the second floor. And when I get there, I buy a pair of trousers, some braces, and what was the other? Oh, and a waistcoat, vest. I mean, but you know, we don't have to work at it. It's fairly, people don't get too confused by that. What now? Wait a minute. Well, still on differences. Sidewalk, as I say, sidewalk. Closet, cupboard, diaper, nappies, pacifier, dummy, gas, petrol, hood on a car, bonnet. Americans always think that's very funny. All right, it depends on your sense of humor. Overpass, flyover, flashlight, torch, fall, autumn. But you do use autumn here because, after all, Maury Sanders wrote a famous book called Cheyenne Autumn. So it's not as if these words aren't understood, but they're just a little shop store. See, a shop with you is what we call a workshop, you know, carpentry or metalwork. So a shop with us is a place you go, like Safeways is a big shop. Teeter-totter is a seesaw with us. Now, what do you think is the most common Americanism ever invented? And it would be understood, it is understood, almost worldwide. Again, perhaps not in the deep depths of the jungle in Papua New Guinea, but most other places. Any suggestions as to the...
Singer.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Yes, okay. Okay is understood, you know, you could go to deepest Mongolia and they'll know what you're talking about. And it's very it's a useful one because you can say, "Oh, it's okay," and people will know, well, you know, or you can say, "Oh, okay," and it can be an adjective. That was an okay idea. It can be a verb. I want you to okay this. You know, I okayed it. Verb. Where have we got to? Adjective, adverb. It can be anything you like. Do you know the second? Well, this is a little bit more controversial, but I like to believe the second most common, even used by Putin. No comment. I don't know whether it's true, but it's a nice thought. Nice thought. Now, where did English come from? Because it's a mongrel. It's a hybrid. It's a mixed blood, and it's the stronger for it. That's one of its great strengths. It's been out and borrowed from hither and thither and the other place. Now, I'm not a historian, and if there is one here that, or someone who really knows background to the English language, they'll shoot me down. But basically, if you go back 2,000 years, the British Isles was inhabited by Celts, and they spoke Celtic. And then along come the Romans about the time of Christ's birth. There isn't much influence from Latin into the Celts still spoke Celtic, but they understood some of the basics of Latin. It's doubtful that the language absorbed much into their own language. The Romans quit about 400 and some AD, and then there was a little lull for, I don't know, 40, 50 years, maybe a century. And then the east coast of Britain was not exactly invaded in any sort of, organized sense, but people from the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes and the Frisians are all sort of loosely related, coming from the northeast of what today would be Germany and southern, northern or Holland, Germany and southern Denmark. That sort of, well, take my word for it. And they came in, and there was only about 200,000 of them, you know, and we now have a language spoken by, 1.5 billion or something, and it came out of this very limited. They pushed the Celts out, and but some Celtic is still spoken on what we call the Celtic fringe, extreme west of Wales and the Isle of Man, and up in the Hebrides of the islands off the west coast of Scotland. There's still, and in Brittany, in France. I have a small house in Brittany, and the notices are all, in French, and then underneath would be the equivalent in the place names. Where have I got to? Oh, yes. I actually missed out a rather neat little piece, which I won't tell you. Sorry about that. Going back to these words, some words came over almost with the Pilgrim Fathers, with the Mayflower, which we don't use in England, but you still do. The most sort of classic, no great importance, is faucet. We call that a tap. If you said in England, I've got a trouble with the faucet's leaking, well, I suppose if you said the faucet's leaking, it'd be pretty obvious. But if you said, I've got a faucet that's giving you trouble, most people in Britain wouldn't know what you were talking about. When I wrote this down, I had to look up in the dictionary to see how you spelt the silly thing. Because I spelt it F-A-W-C-E-T-T. And I thought, well, I better check that. No, it's F-A-U, isn't it? Yeah, well, that shows you. And there are various other words like that. Mad. To you, I'm mad at you. I'm angry about something. Mad to us is a bit insane. Gotten. Gotten is an interesting one because you use gotten quite often. The only time in English that you'll hear gotten is when it's I've forgotten something, or the rather archaic phrase, ill-gotten gains. But you will use gotten. We got no real good result on whatever it was, the football or something. Trash, rubbish. And there's a difference between being sick and ill. Sick in England means whereas I think what would be the equivalent in if somebody vomits.
Yeah, they vomit.
They vomit. Thank you. A particular one, because you find it in Chaucer, apparently. It's 100 years since I at school had to do Chaucer, but I'm told. I guess. Now, in English, we would tend to say, I think, or I reckon. But I guess is in Chaucer, and you know, it's basic to American. What other one? Skillet. With frying pan. I had to look up in the dictionary when I wrote this down, you know, exactly what a skillet is. Because I noticed in Safeways the other day, they sell skillets. Frying pan. Platter, mayhem. There are these interesting little words which you have hung on to. There's a sort of tradition, well, there's the allegation, oh yes, well it's only in the deepest Appalachia and the Adirondack, you know, people really sort of hillbillies. No, it's you folks, and you're not hillbilly, well, don't think you are. But sorry, I sort of nipped there, because I think that's interesting. But getting back to where English came from, yes, we have the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes and the Frisians. Let's just look at the word English. It's spelt not as we say it, because it ought to be spelled I-N-G, right? But it's E-N-G, English. Just sort of wind back a little further, then you get Anglish, and that comes from the Angles, the Anglo-Saxons. And if the French people really want to insult me, or they'll say, oh, you're bloody Anglo-Saxon. It's sort of almost a curse word. So you have the beginnings of Anglish, A-N-G-L-I-S-C-H, owing to the German, or the Germanic. The one date that, well, there are several dates that all English, well, British school children should know, but one is 1066. Battle of Hastings, yes. William the Conqueror, Guillaume le Conquérant, as in French, he came and invaded. He set off from more or less where the 1944 invasion beaches are today. And he was successful, and he and his lords and all that, they took over. And so now you got the infusion of French, which is basically a Latinate language. And if you look, I just picked this up, it was just sitting here. I don't know what it is, but if you sort of want an official, semi-official document, the tendency will be to use the French version. So you have the FMR, not quite sure what the FMR is, but something to do with this, can be scheduled for faculty meetings and events by CSC faculty and academic administrators. Now, most of the words there come from the French. They don't sound French, but that's where they come from. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, Anglo-Saxon. Liberty, French. Pursuit, French. Happiness, Anglo-Saxon. I mean, obviously, way back then, they didn't sort of say happiness, but that's where the word comes from. So it's quite interesting, I think, comparing the sort of easygoing, or sometimes the punchy words. Anglo-Saxon has the ability, well, where did I put it? I've got some examples of words that come from, I've lost it someplace. The direct words, hit, go, dare I say it, piss, shit, those sort of, you know, no messing words, oftentimes one syllable, or almost one syllable. And quite a good example of the power of those words is Churchill's, I don't know whether it would be famous here, but in June 1940, when things were pretty difficult, France had fallen and Italy was about to come into the war, and the Germans were seriously talking about invading Britain. And Churchill says something like, we shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the fields, we shall fight in the streets, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the hills. We will never surrender. And the one word that is not Anglo-Saxon in its derivation is surrender. If I was really naughty, I'd say that's French, and you folks will know about the cheese-eating surrender monkeys. Naughty. But anyway, no, because I like the French. Well, the Bretons. Now, where have we got to? I should have sort of really worked. Yeah, well, we've done about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So that, you know, that English is this mixture of the Anglo-Saxony bit and the French, and then we borrow words from all over the place. You know, shampoo comes from India. I should have a list of them handy, but well, you know, you talk about a powwow, which you get from, I don't say you get it from Pine Ridge, but you know, in a sense you do. Now, if we've still got time, I'm not quite sure. Have we got another 10 minutes? Okay. I would like to break completely with this and tell you something which I find fascinating. And it's a bit provocative in this, given this audience. The real background to the Louisiana Purchase. I would say that if Lord Nelson, who was a famous British admiral, had not taken out the French fleet at the Battle of the Nile, the far end of the Mediterranean, who knows, we might not be here. And if we were, we might be speaking French. Okay, I will explain. In 1798, Napoleon had the idea of short-circuiting the British interests in India, because the Brits had to go right round Cape of Good Hope, a voyage of thousands of miles. But we were doing pretty well in India, and Napoleon was, well, he was jealous. He wanted to do something about it. So he landed 20,000 troops in Egypt in order to take that part, sort of the Levant, as it was called then, and who knows, dig a canal. Napoleon was always digging canals. There are several in France, quite big ones, to connect the Mediterranean with the Red Sea. He couldn't have been much of a geographer, because he'd have realized that the wind's only blowing one way, so how the hell he's going to get his ships down? He couldn't get his ships down. He could get them back up. But anyway, Nelson comes along and he wipes out that fleet. There was a supply fleet. Okay, move on, fast forward sort of 5 years. President Jefferson, is quite worried, because he can see that what the 13 states want to do is get over the Appalachians, which they were already, quite a lot of trade beyond, coming down the Ohio and the Mississippi, and exiting at New Orleans, which was in the hand of the Spanish. There was a treaty done, extraordinary, but the whole of that, of La Louisiane, which was, you know, 13 states covered the area today, suddenly became French. And Jefferson heard that Napoleon was seriously turning over in his mind the idea of restarting a French empire in North America out of a bridgehead, New Orleans. To move up the Mississippi and to move west to Texas. Because remember, the Brits had already removed the French, so to speak, from Canada. And Jefferson was concerned about this, and he was even more concerned when he learnt that Napoleon had dispatched an expeditionary force of 25,000 men to what was then called Santo Domingo, which is Haiti and Dominican Republic. Ostensibly, Napoleon said that what he was doing, he was putting down a black revolt led by a remarkable black man called Toussaint Louverture. Jefferson distrusted this story, and he was worried that what Napoleon was really going to do was, sure, leave some troops, say 5,000. It was the biggest expeditionary force that the world had seen. Leave about 5,000 troops in Santo Domingo and put the others into New Orleans. And he got hold of the French, I suppose he was the French ambassador to the US, And he actually said, and this is, you know, this is like, I know it's in the Smithsonian, but it's absolutely kosher, shall we say. He told the French ambassador, quote, "The day that the first French soldier lands in New Orleans, from that moment we must marry ourselves," nice verb, "we must marry ourselves to the British fleet and nation." Because the British fleet was by far and away the most powerful military force in the world at that time. Now, the last thing Napoleon wanted was an alliance between the states, the US states, and Britain. And so he got in a bit of a flap. And you will recall, I'm sure, that Livingston, the American man in Paris, was instructed by Jefferson to keep going and asking what they'll sell New Orleans for. And the answer from Talleyrand, the sort of Secretary of State vis-a-vis Napoleon, was always, forget it, we're not interested. And then suddenly, it's not only, well, what do you give us for New Orleans? What will you give us for this whole big pack? Why did Napoleon change his mind? Napoleon, I think, changed his mind. Yes, quite true. What you get in the American history books is he was losing too many men in Santo Domingo to yellow fever. True. He was also losing men to the Black Revolt, to San Louverture. He lost his own brother-in-law. And he wanted the money, because the deal was $15 million, as you'll know. He wanted the money to rebuild his fleet, preparatory to invading Britain. What you don't get in American history books, if I may say so, is the reference to the latent threat of the Royal Navy. Because he obviously said to himself, I got it in the neck in Egypt. They wiped out, you know, and I had to leave 20,000 troops to rot, which he did. He got back to France. You know, once shy, you know, or once bitten, you know, you're not going to go down that route again. And so suddenly he tells Talleyrand, get rid of it. Get $15 million bucks. Great. We'll rebuild the fleet. So in my book, yes, yellow fever, Black Revolt, the need for money, but the one thing you won't find much in American history books, as far as I can see, is any mention of the British Navy's. Of course, it never had to engage. That wasn't the point. It was latently there as a threat in the Channel, English Channel, to blockade, and also in the Caribbean, or the Caribbean. Now, one little more element on that. The Americans said, well, we ship over 3 million, and we'll ship the rest over the next 8-9 years at 4, 5, 6%. And Napoleon said, no, the hell with that. I want the money now because I want to rebuild my fleet. Now, there was a truce between Britain and France, unlikely, but it's true. The Treaty of Amiens. A British bank, Baring Brothers, merchant bank, heard of this, and they said to the Americans, they had a man in Philadelphia and another man in Paris. They said, look, you get your 3 million over, and we'll do a deal with you. We'll come up with the other 12 on a sort of mortgage. So you could say, and this is where I get provocative, well, maybe I'm already being provocative, but the Louisiana Purchase was bought on a mortgage. And I heard about this, and I said to a friend of mine who lived up the road, who worked at the Bank of England, I said, Baring Brothers, they went bust, didn't they, about 12 years ago? Yes, they did. There was a rogue trader in Singapore who busted them. And he said, yes, but they were bought for £1, bankrupt, by an Anglo-Dutch bank, ENG. And, you know, they're down in the city, and the city is the Wall Street of London. Give them a call. So I phoned them up, and I said, there's a PBX lady, if you've got a press office, you go to the press office. And I knew that the fellow in the press office wouldn't know anything about the Louisiana Purchase. So I said, I'm not calling about the credit crunch and the economic collapse of half the Western world. I'm calling about something called the Louisiana Purchase. And he said, oh, yes, you need to talk to our archivist about that. And the next morning I was down there, and Mrs. Moira Lovegrove, I remember the name well, she met me in the lobby. We went up to the 3rd, 4th floor boardroom, big mahogany table. And there, believe it or not all, but most of the financial documents for the purchase of La Louisiane. One small point, which particularly pleased me, I wrote and told my friend John Gottschalk, the ex-CEO of the World Herald in Omaha, and he said, oh, that's funny because I know the man he lives in Omaha, who has the Jefferson and Madison's declaration that the deal's done. And would you like to see it? You bet. So we went out to, Walter Scott is his name, and he's big construction, very wealthy. And they're in a sort of, an appropriate, I don't know whether it's hermetically sealed, but the glass case is about the 6 pages of the original declaration with all the handwriting. It's handwritten and with crossings out and, inserts and sort of arrows and the sort of thing you'd expect. And what had happened was that had been sent to the government printers, and the government printers had made 30, 40 copies, and, you didn't need the original because it was all a mess, and presumably put in the gash bin. But someone had enough, what have you, to, hey, wait a minute, and they pulled it out. It's been passed down, and I think when Walter Scott is leaving it to the Jocelyn. So I'm rather tickled because I can say I've seen the financial document, and I've also seen the other thing at the other end. One last story, because I just like it, and it's American and it's English. Winston Churchill, in 1943, I think, he's invited by President Roosevelt to discuss what we're going to do with Russia, the kind of thing, and the invasion of Europe and this and that. And Churchill is invited to address the combined houses. It was great honor. I think he was the first foreigner ever to be so invited. And the second one, I think, was a fellow I worked with quite a lot, Alistair Cook. But anyway, this is on film. And he's been invited, great honor. And he gets himself up, and he's sort of, rather bulldoggy, and he thanks the assembled congressmen and senators for this great honor, this marvelous invitation. And then he says, but I cannot help reflecting that had my mother been English and my father American, because he's half American, if my mother had been English and my father had been American, who knows? But I might have reached here on my own without your invitation. And that's a lovely story. Finished. I'm sorry, I've rolled all over the bloody place. I'm not very well organized. You see, with film, you can cut it afterwards and get it in the order, and that's what I'm used to, and I was a bit sort of all over the place. But anyway, thank you very much. I don't know whether there are any questions, and I certainly don't know whether I'll be able to answer them. But we'll give it a go. If there are any questions, maybe not. Well, thank you very much. Oh, and I must thank Joy and Sarah, who sort of masterminding. They've got me ricocheting all over the county, the state, sorry. I did sort of say today, do I have to go to Peru? Because that's a 500 and something mile round trip to do one talk, and they very kindly sort of, yeah, okay. You don't have to go to Peru. I'm sure I'd love Peru and Peruvians, but the only disadvantage of that is I'm not able to say to my friends in England, they had me driving more than 1,000 miles to do. Anyway, well, thank you for being such a good audience.